Well, today's project should be a quicker one, I think. So I've got here a Spectrum 840CW and a Walthers 840BW. The owner of these models sent them to me so that I could do some isolation work to get them ready for DCC installation. I'm not the one doing the installation, but I am at least getting things isolated, just tuned up a little bit. So let's go ahead and get through that then. I'll start with the Spectrum one, since I've already done a video on these before. I'll just get straight to having it taken apart and show what needs to be done. And before I get started on isolating it, I'll just give it a quick tune-up. It seems like there are a couple issues with some split axles, which is not uncommon for some of these older Spectrums, but I should be able to fix that. Looks like 4 out of 6 axle gears have some splits going through them, so that at least makes the wheels easy to pull out. So to get these repaired, let's see what can be done. Yeah, I think what I can do here is, well, first I can try to, I'll just kind of touch the cracked area a little bit with a soldering iron to melt the plastic back together. Then I'll drill the hole out a little bit and use some super glue and baking soda to hold the wheels in. Okay, so holding that crack closed, very gently touch over there with the small tip. Okay, so that kind of burns that back together a little bit. I've got a good sharp 1/16 inch drill bit here, so I'm just carefully twisting that out, turning with both hands just to try and keep it as even as possible. Okay, it's not quite a slip fit, but it is at least a loose press fit, so that shouldn't put too much strain on the plastic. So to get the axle to stay in there now, I'll put just a touch of super glue in there. Then get a little bit of baking soda on the tip of the axle. And just press it on in. Twist it a little bit. That helps the glue work through. And that should stay on good and tight now. Well, the fix seems to be working. I don't feel any binding in that here. It's a little bit rough, but it means it's working, so I think I can get on to the actual isolation work now. Alright, so obviously the first thing to do is separate the chassis so that I can actually get to the rest of the stuff inside. So 5 screws for this one. And get that off of there. Okay. Get both trucks out of there. And the motor. Just a little bit of oil on these contacts, so I'll wipe that off real quick. Okay, so the first thing I'll do is just solder a couple wires to these here. So this one here is positive right rail, this one negative left rail, so keep that arrow on the left side of the chassis and facing down. As for the amount of wire, I'm going to cut out a few inches here for the motor, just to make sure there's plenty to work with. With this double conductor type wire, I actually really like using this. I think it's pretty convenient. All I have to do is just kind of split down the sides to get it separated. So you can keep it together in the middle, or you can just peel them apart completely and have the 2 colored wires. That should be enough to wrap around where I need on the motor. All right, so you can see there I've already soldered one contact. So to get the other one soldered in place, just get a little bit of solder on the tip of the iron. Touch that to the wire, get that tinned. And same for the contact on the motor. These can take a little bit longer to heat up enough to stick to the solder, but once that's done, the solder holds real nicely to the phosphor bronze. So now I'll just melt that. That gives a good firm connection with the solder. And I'll just kind of bend that in a little bit so that it's not springing out so hard. There, and then finishing that, I'll bend the wires around this way a little. And then just wrap a little tape around that. This is electrical tape. Strap it kind of tightly. And then cut that off. Just using my knife because I realized my scissors are in a different room right now. There, that should be enough there. So now, just fit that back into the chassis. And the wires will come up between the two sides of the split chassis. There should be just enough room for them without causing any sort of damage. Now what we'll do for the trucks, first I'll pull the side frames off here. Alright, so I'm going to clip off most of the contact strip here. I'm going to trim it as flush as possible at this end, because that is no longer needed. So that gives me just a small tab to solder the wires to. And since these are blackened, I'll just scratch off some of that blackening. So like I did for the contact strips on the motor, I'll just tin these tabs a little bit. Actually, all that did was leave some flex behind. So in that case, some of these chemically treated metals just don't like to stick to solder. So you can take a little extra work to get done. Instead, I'll try filing that a bit. It looks like that did a better job. Now for the wire length, I want to run these kind of as far as I can from the mechanical parts. So I'm just kind of measuring around like this over to about the middle of the motor. That should be a good length right there. Okay, that'll do. Now I'll press those side frames back on. And not having those contacts constantly springing against the chassis should also help to keep these from popping off so easily. Actually, I think I can run these wires outside just to help keep them out of the way. We'll see about the other end here, but yeah, this is looking pretty good so far. And as for down here, I want to make sure those contacts don't touch the chassis, and that looks pretty good to me. Now, I'll bend these contacts in a little more just to make sure that they don't get too close to the chassis. Alright, now fitting the two halves back together, I think I can just grind out a little passage for the wires to go through here, and then can come around the back and up, and that'll keep it out of the way of the worm and the gear. Now, as for the motor wires, I've noticed that the chassis isn't quite fitting around that, so I'm also going to grind out a little bit of, or at least file out a little bit of material right here and around the other side. And that should take care of that issue. Before going to all the trouble of grinding, I realized that since the metal is thin right here, it'll probably just be quicker and easier to grab some heavy pliers and do this. Just give that metal a little bend right there, and breaks right out. So now when I put the motor in, fits with no interference. Okay, the two halves are back together. Got the wires run around back there, which seems to be working just fine. That should have good clearance for the shell. Same around here. That whole system seems to be working fine. So I've got some electrical tape around here just for isolation to help when the DCC is installed. And just to get it going temporarily, I went ahead and soldered the ends of the wires together. There should be enough length here for getting the decoder in place. And as for the inside of the shell, this lighting board is no longer going to be used, of course, so I'll go ahead and take it out. It's just got that one screw holding it in from the look of it. Yeah, there that goes. The front headlight is glued into its lens, so I'm just going to unsolder those two wires. Okay, so that takes care of that at least. And for the rear light bulb, well, that's probably going to be replaced along with the PC board here, so I'll just leave that one on there, but of course I'll include it in the box with the engine. So now, this should fit back on top. It's a little bit tight around the rear wires. I sort of expected that though. It is fitting. Okay, that all seems to be fine. And looking at how the chassis fits inside, this whole area up here is a lot more open, so I think the decoder will fit best in the kind of front spot here. And as for the speaker, this actually pops off of here, so I think a speaker can fit inside of this spot. And just making sure again that it's working. Takes right off. It's never going to be a perfect runner without at least a couple of replacement axle gears, I think. But that is working. So that should be ready for DCC installation. Now for the Walthers Dash 8, these are already wired together, so they don't really need any isolation, I don't think, but he still wanted me to look it over and make sure it's in good running condition. So I'll go ahead and get started with that. So let's see how this is held together. I think the coupler boxes might have something to do with that. Yeah, it looks like the screws for the coupler boxes double as the ones that are holding the shell on. This must have taken a big hit somewhere along the way because it is hard to break these Katy metal couplers. Well, let's see. Does that just come up now, or is there anything else holding it in place? Okay, that is just coming up. It is a tightly fit shell. There it goes. This is interesting. So it has one of these PC boards with the connectors fit over it, but at the same time, the wires are just soldered down, so there wasn't even any point to putting these in there. And the motor is mounted to the fuel tank, which is made of metal, but it's also kind of loose in there. So I guess this does need a bit of a look over to figure things out. This tape is completely dried up and useless, so I'll just leave that out completely. Replace that with some fresh stuff. So I'm just going to hold these contacts down on the PC board, see if this turns on. Seems to be okay. I think it just needs a little tune-up. It should be fine with that. And with the way that this is put together, I can't really get the weight off and get inside without removing the PC board, so just unsoldering the trucks and the motor from it. Okay, that one just kind of broke off. Looks like a damaged pad there. Okay, so now the PC board is held on by a couple screws. There's the weight. It looks like the screw holding the board on also holds down the back of the weight. But there are two more screws up front. Is the motor just snapped in? I see these 4 screws down here. Maybe they're also holding the weight in. Okay. Oh, I see. So there's just one screw down here holding the weight in. Tighten that up a little. So that'll at least keep it from twisting around. These look like the same motors that are used in a lot of Atlas and Proto diesels, so it's a good quality 5-pole one there. The flywheels are pretty big too. But I do feel some imbalance from them, so I'll take care of that. Now, the easiest way to figure out where the flywheels are off balance is to start up the motor. Just hold that firmly down and lightly touch a Sharpie to it. Looks like it's just about this area for this flywheel. The other one looks like it's all right. So I'll just start by drilling a hole right in this area on this flywheel. Okay, that took some material out from there. Let's see if that helped at all. Okay, that was a lucky shot because the balance is now completely perfect. Usually I have to go at it for a little while until it feels just right, but well, once in a while I get a little bit lucky. Now, to get these trucks cleaned up, so we get them off of a Walthers trainline engine. First you have to remove that universal cup there, and then you can squeeze a couple tabs right in here, and that releases it. Then you just twist it around until you can pull it out. Now, as for the rest of the truck, I hadn't even looked at the bottom of it yet, but it looks like this wheel is just falling off of its little plastic sleeve there. So this needs a little bit of work done, I'd say. Let's see. I think these side frames are just pressed on. There's some fragile detail around there, so you want to pry carefully with one of these. Now, as for getting the truck apart, there's this bottom plate here with a clip at each end. Let's just undo one of those. And there's the whole gear system in there. Wheels pull right out. There's the sprung contact, so it gets 8-wheel pickup. Then take off this top clip. And that allows you to pull the side plate off so that you can get inside. And this is actually still pretty clean. In fact, there's barely any oil at all in there, and most of it is in good condition. So I'm just going to add a touch of oil to each of these bearings, and then the maybe a little fresh grease to the gears, and that should be enough for these. Now, looking at this wheel here, I think I can just squeeze that back on. Doesn't feel super tight. Doesn't feel too loose either. But I don't want that to slip back off, so I'm just going to add a touch of glue to that. That'll make sure that it doesn't slip off while it's running somewhere down the line. Twist that in a little. And once that starts to dry, yeah, it's taking hold now. And before I put the wheels back in, I'm just going to bend these contacts out a little. Make sure they've got good contact with the wheels. Don't want them to be too tight, of course. Yeah, that feels good there. Add in that bit of fresh grease, just spreading it around a couple of these gears. As the model runs, that'll work its way in. Snap that cover back on. There, now there's one reassembled and ready to go. I've got both trucks done now, and things seems to be working smoothly, so I'm getting it all back together. For the motor there, since one of those pads was broken, I just soldered it directly to the contact over here. Really doesn't make any difference. And now I'm just going to solder the rest of the wires back in place. Okay, that's all the wires resoldered. And I'm actually not even going to bother putting these plastic caps back on, because since all those are soldered, they're kind of pointless. I'll just throw them in a little bag along with that Bachmann board. So at least I'll be together in that way. And the headlight goes over here. Since the old tape is dried out and no longer useful, I'll just replace that with some fresh stuff. Might as well use electrical tape here too. And this time I've got my scissors out. Let's just wrap a piece around here. That'll hold that. And the same for this one. Just have to make sure that is centered back there so that it shines correctly into those rear lenses. That looks good. Just giving it a quick test before I put the shell back on. Everything's looking good. There's the top speed. Working nice and smooth. And we're drawing about 0.2 amps. And directional lighting is working, so I think that's all the tune-up work that has to be done on here. So since this one is a wired model, it doesn't need any isolation for DCC. All you do is take out the old board and solder in the new one. So I'll get the shell back on here, and I think this one will be ready to go. These do have a really nice looking shell too. Walthers could easily bring this back out with a few extra detail parts in the mainline series. Since the old couplers are damaged, I'll just throw on some of these McHenrys with the coil spring. These work well, so that shouldn't cause any problems. Put these screws in. Yeah. Seems like things don't quite want to work here. Okay, this time I'll just thread this screw into there, except it tightens all the way. That's odd. Okay, well, I'll get it in there most of the way. And then put it into here. Then tighten it down. There, that seems like it actually worked. There, now that's both couplers on. So that is fully reassembled and ready to go. After examining things a little more closely, I found that there's actually not enough room for speakers where I thought there would be, so for the Spectrum chassis, I'm going to mill out this portion of the fuel tank just to give some extra space where needed. And then for the Walthers one, I'll just take out a little bit of weight from the top piece here, and that should do. I don't have the tools for doing that at home though, so I'm going to take that out somewhere else where I can finish that. Okay, now I think I've got these both ready for sound installation. So for the Walthers one, I just knocked out a piece of metal in the middle here, so when this PC board is replaced with the proper decoder, the speaker should be able to fit right in here with plenty of room. Then for the Spectrum one, there's just a little paint drying here, but I milled out this area of the fuel tank, so that'll give a good amount of space for a nice quality speaker that should have some decent sound to it. The fireman wasn't too lucky going through the mill there, unfortunately, so I apologize for that, but hopefully that can be replaced and look just fine. The engineer is still alive though, so at least he can drive the thing home. So now I'll just put the shells back on and these will be ready to go.